And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Mark Samuel. Mark is a CEO of Impact, which is an award winning international consulting firm that guides organizations in achieving measurable breakthrough results within 6 months. He is also a thought leader, he is an author, he's an award winning speaker at places like the ASTD, AQP, ODN, ASHHRA. I think you only do things with lots of vowels, Mark. I think that's a theme when you're speaking. And you've worked with some really cool companies like Chevron and Amex and Genentech and all that sort of fun stuff. So welcome aboard today, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. It's great to be here.
Cool. So let's dive in here. So you've been at this for quite some time,
Yes.
from sort of the thought leadership to the content creation to the authorship. Why don't we start with maybe some of the differences in your thinking when you launched your last book, B State, compared to your first book, and tell us about the time frame between the first and the last.
Yeah, there was probably about, let me think here with some quick math, probably about 12 to 15 years difference between writing one and writing the other. And the book that I launched in the early 2000s was really focused on individual accountability and how do people get out of the victim mode and yet do it in a way that's not punishing. Like, how do we create an environment where people can count on each other and yet still be human, still make mistakes, still have challenges, but that doesn't keep us from being accountable and really becoming more accountable, not only at work but at home. And that was my whole focus of my first book.
So let me ask, when you say the focus was on the individual, I might interpret that as more personal development, consumer oriented. Is that a fair categorization?
Yes, yeah, it would be fair. And really what we were trying to do is get to all employees within an organization to pick up a value of accountability that they could translate at home and still operate at work and get out of the blame game. I mean, we still have it today, unfortunately, but at least it's a little bit less, and there's more teamwork today. But 15 years ago, the silos and the individual competition between people, and just the sheer victimization when problems occurred, of blaming each other or hiding, all that stuff. So we really want to get that.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about sort of the journey and the morphing of the focus, not so much just on the individual and their sort of internalizing and living in an accountable way, but moving that more towards sort of the team and the enterprise and the organization. How did you have to sort of do things differently in terms of the content creation, and then obviously I want to talk about the solutions that Impact provides to their corporate clients.
Yeah, well, what we discovered right away is that we could focus on individual accountability, but the problem was when you start to get into middle management, now all of a sudden they're protective of their functional area. So what it did was even though as individuals people were willing to be more open and more transparent and work well with others, a lot of times they were blocked, quite honestly, by their middle manager who wanted them to go through them first in a controlling mode, in a micromanaging mode, and also in a way that would, you start to have middle managers get downsized. So people got in a protective mode, and I have to make my functional area look good, and my functional area has to win. And all of a sudden, we're right back to another level of victimization that we knew we had to resolve because the silos created at the middle management level was impacting the entire culture. And so that's when we moved much more towards cross functional accountability instead of just individual accountability.
Okay, so what does that look like then? So, I mean, individual accountability conceptually is a great thing,
Right?
right? But then you get to the point, which is what I'm hearing you say is, but it's those other folks, right? If I'm in marketing, it's
Right.
sales, or it's those
Right.
people, whatever that could be different division or function. So your sort of secret sauce is ultimately cracking the code in a cross functional sense. So we're getting all those quote other people to sort of be in the same place together. So tell me about how that works. How do you convene a cross functional intervention?
Yeah, and what we discovered there, the only way that we could do it successfully was to actually bring as many middle managers together as possible and make them into their own unified team. And that became the real secret sauce, because once you give them the accountability for operational excellence for the whole organization, and it's not just functional excellence, it now is, you know impacting the entire organization. Now all of a sudden they had to break down those silos and start working cross functionally to solve problems that go across the organization. And whereas some methodologies like Lean and Six Sigma and those will do that in small segments, there was no methodology that actually included everybody, that included the entire cross-functional breadth of an organization. And yet that's where culture lies.
Got it.
You can't solve a culture with four departments where eight departments are left out. So if you really want to create an accountable culture and you really want to start working on these major priorities that extend across the organization, you got to get middle managers working together as a unified team. It doesn't and and it doesn't mean they all have to be, making every decision together and
Right,
doing
right, right.
things by consensus. They can separate and work separately, but ultimately they have to feed everything back to that unified group so that everybody is included, at least from an information standpoint, if not an input standpoint.
Got it. So take me for a moment behind the curtains into
Yes,
the product development side of that. So I get the problem. I get how the sort of the methodology is incredibly impactful at that cross functional level.
yes,
But now you go from being a guy that's an author and a facilitator and a consultant and all that. What are your thoughts around getting that out to more people in an organization to sustain that behavior change? Because often, and I'm not saying this happens here, but oftentimes there's some heavy duty intervention, right, that gets things ungunked, and then that third party goes away, and then lo and behold, human nature being what it is, some period of time goes on and things start to gunk up again. So
yes.
how are you as a CEO sort of designing ongoing intervention sustainability solutions to sort of not make everything go to zero forever, but to sort of deal with that issue?
Well, the biggest key for us is, and that's what we discovered over time, is that when you start to impact cross functional accountability and go across the organization, things begin to change pretty fast. And the whole, what leadership's role is, begins to change dramatically, where a lot more decisions can be made at that middle management level. So, the thing that we did to make sure that it was sustainable was set it up actually as a system where we're measuring deliverables, cross functional execution, and team relationships or leadership relationships at the same time. And it's in that system where we come back and measure that every 6 months that keeps people focused. It helps them to evolve. Like, as an example, when groups create their habits of execution, because now they can't just work individually according to their favorite style. They have to work according to what's going to get those deliverables, achieve those deliverables across the organization in an optimal way. What we found was after 6 months, most teams want to add three or four new habits that they never even thought of when we first get together, because they're learning from it and seeing where new breakdowns show up. So it's a very evolutionary process,
Cool.
but that's why measurement has to be in place. So
Got it.
most of the organizations end up doing this for anywhere from 5 to 10 years on their own once we set up the system and they get used to doing the monitoring and keeping the whole thing alive.
So I love that. So it sounds like a key part of your process and methodologies are based on landing on those proper metrics up front. So we're living in an age where everybody is metric focused, almost to an extreme,
Yes,
right? So the marketing folks got their butts kicked 15 years ago when Google started to be a big deal. So they've got to show a cost per click. Clearly, the learning folks are in that sort of suffering from that a little bit now and trying to deal with it. And then on the other side, we've got all these analytics that can give you all this metrics. So what are the things that you look for big picture to help an organization decide these are the metrics, these are the five things that we should really, really focus on? Because we live in an age where you can have too many metrics, which is not enough. And then if you don't have the right metrics, that's not good either. So it sounds like
Right.
that's part of your methodology.
That's right. And too often we're only measuring or creating metrics for outcomes, and even our KPIs aren't necessarily getting at what are those actual habits of execution that we need to have in play. So that's why we measure three different things. We measure outcomes through the deliverables. We measure execution, which is how we function together in terms of decision making, sharing information, problem solving, managing projects, and those are all behavioral. And then we measure relationships that affect trust, support, communication, openness, managing conflict, etc. And we correlate those measurements. So, in other words, we're looking for balance between those three, because when they get out of balance, that means it's not going to be sustainable. Usually means that we're having to work hard to get our results and put a lot of effort in without necessarily being able to sustain it long term. In other words, willpower gets tiring. So
Got it.
we're using it all those. And let me give you a quick analogy. The metric for batting is a batting average. But if I really want to help someone who keeps dropping their shoulder, I have to actually set up a metric or measure how often are you dropping your shoulder for every 10 pitches. And that's going to let me know how you're functioning, that will help you improve your batting average. So we got to get to the execution side, which most organizations aren't doing. They go to leading indicators, but before a leading indicator is your indicator of execution.
Got it. So when you're working with an organization today, business is business and the gist of the problems haven't changed all that much, right? What's different today versus, say, 15 years ago in terms of patience, tolerance, the amount of face time you get with a client? Like, talk about sort of that, because that's changed a lot.
Yeah, I think the biggest change right now is speed. And speed is driving a level of complexity because we actually have to change faster than we're able to change in our old culture, in our old way of doing things, our old processes. And unfortunately, generally lean processes, which are very good for continuous improvement, aren't fast enough to make the dramatic changes that sometimes businesses have to make to stay alive. Like, you look at an Amazon and how quickly they've changed the game of shipping and customer expectations, that literally it's just a game changer for most.
Right. No, somebody orders something on a Monday afternoon from Amazon, and then they get the response email like, "Oh my God, it's not coming till Wednesday because I waited till 6 o'clock." And like, wait a minute, wasn't it just 2 years ago where it might have taken a week, or you would
Right.
have had to go in your car and then go drive to Staples and buy some, a case of copy paper or something ridiculous and lose an hour of your life? Like, we forget, we acclimate to that quickly. So where I was going with that, Mark, is given that the speed of business has got turbo boosters on it, I think that the speed of coaches and consultants and thought leaders and organizations like yours have not necessarily made the adjustments that they've needed, because a lot of times a consulting firm will come in and say, well, here's what we'll do the first quarter and here's what this will look like, and then here's our 18-month roadmap, and they're going,
Right.
18 months, my hair's on fire. and
Yeah.
you like could you fix this like maybe in a couple of weeks? So that's what I'm talking about. How do you condense the time to impact as someone that's in the intervention business, basically?
Well, and that's quite honestly the basis of our B State book, which is all about breakthrough state. Like, how do you create a breakthrough culture where things can happen faster, where we're expecting results and measurable results within 3 to 6 months? And that includes changing enough of the culture that it can sustain fast change and make the mindset shifts and make the behavior changes almost instantly. Like, we measure it in 3 to 6 months, but we expect the change to start happening the day after we work with the client. Like, it's like we're already beginning to use new behaviors and new mindset when we're actually working with the client on their real issues, and literally turning their whole world upside down.
So let's touch on that for a little bit. So you're talking now to an audience of other authors and thought leaders and consultants.
Yeah.
So what have you done to accelerate or change the way you operate or whatever to give your client some taste of success, something tangible that you can show them really, really quickly in an engagement. Whereas in the past, the standard cadence was, well, we know any sort of change is going to take a year and blah, blah, blah. Like, what would you tell your sort of peers or competitors or whatever? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, and I think it's mainly one key thing, and that is we had to get away from assessing the problem, focusing on the obstacles, focusing on the breakdowns, focusing all the things that are not working, and move to a consciousness and get everybody in that we're working with to move to a consciousness of what would it look like if we were to literally recreate the organization, reinvent the organization for a year from now when we're already in a transformed state. So let's just assume for a moment, right now our customer service takes 5 days. What would it look like if we were responding to customers within a day? And what would that mean in terms of coordination, in terms of decision making, in terms of how we need to team together? Like, what would we have to do, not solving any problems from our past, but simply redesigning how we function today? I'd rather have people imagine what it could look like, because then they don't bring with them all the problems that are historic in the past. And if they can create that, and they do, and actually get pretty excited about it, then they can say, oh, well, how would we be functioning with each other? How would we be making decisions in new ways and sharing information in different ways and you're not creating transparency because of some value in transparency. You're actually creating transparency because it is the only way to get information fast enough to respond to what each function has to do. And so it enlivens the group. And honestly, we've taken groups, just to give you an example, we've taken groups that were completely polarized, ready to attack each other. But as soon as we give them that future state, there's no more conflict because we didn't have to solve the problem. The new environment, those problems simply don't exist anymore.
Got it. So as we start to wind down a little bit, give us, and I'm pivoting here, so I want to get you prepared for this. In the last book, in B State,
Yeah.
what are 2 or 3 things that you learned that when and if you were going to write another book, or if you were to advise someone that's in the process of launching a book, you would have them strongly consider?
Well, what did I learn? There's a few things. One is, whenever you're choosing a title for a book, make sure you go test it on your market, because we tested it with our clients, but we didn't test, which B State came from our clients. Like, every client would get excited about moving from A to B, and then they'd refer to B State as their ideal state, and it became very popular with different clients, and we never even promoted it. They just created it.
Okay.
But for people who don't know B State, it's flat, because nobody knows what it is. People are going to think, why not A State? What does it even mean?
So you tested it, but you only tested it on clients, not people that didn't know who the heck you were, that weren't fluent in impact-ease, if you will.
That's right. That's
Okay,
exactly right. So,
that's good. Anything else?
well, and then the other thing is, and it was actually a change I did for the book. So this book has gotten even better response than my previous books. And a big part of that is I was willing to be vulnerable in the book. I told a lot of personal stories. I told the history, and
Yep.
people tend to like that. Now, there's people that don't. There's some people that still like textbook, like
Yep.
me. I want to see the diagram. I want to see bullets.
Right.
But
Right.
people that like stories, and quite honestly, as we move more towards the millennial generations and Gen X and all that, they love the stories, and they like the connection that comes from that.
So stories, sort of authenticity and vulnerability,
Yes.
and then test the title. Those are great tips.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much for sharing with us today, Mark. This has been incredibly productive, and I think there's a lot of good information that's been bantered back and forth here. So thank you so much for all that you've shared with us today.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter, and thanks for those great questions.
My pleasure. To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.